The moment you cross paths again after a long period of silence, watch carefully. The first few seconds can reveal more than an entire conversation. A person who once had easy access to your attention, emotions, and reactions may suddenly behave very differently when they realize that access is gone. Their face may change, their tone may change. They may become unusually confident, unusually friendly, completely distant, or strangely interested in what you are doing. And the most revealing part may happen before they even speak. No contact does more than stop communication. It changes the entire dynamic between two people. It removes the constant flow of attention and gives you space to stop reacting, explaining, chasing, or trying to prove yourself. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, losing that access can feel like a major shift in the relationship dynamic. That is why seeing you again can become a moment of testing. They may want to know whether you still react the way you used to, whether you still look nervous, whether you still become emotional, whether they can still pull your attention toward them with one look, one sentence, or one small gesture. And this is where things become interesting, because what looks like confidence may sometimes be impression management, while what looks like friendliness may simply be a test to see if the door is still open. In this video, you will learn the immediate behaviors to watch for when you encounter someone with strong narcissistic patterns after no contact. We will break down why they may check your reaction first, why they can suddenly act completely unbothered, how they may try to reopen communication, and why charm can sometimes turn into guilt or provocation when you refuse to respond as expected. You will also learn the subtle signs that reveal whether they are respecting your boundaries or testing them, and why your calm response can communicate more than any argument ever could. Stay until the end, because the final point changes the entire way you should look at these encounters. The most powerful sign may not be what they do when they see you. It may be what they do after they realize the old version of you is no longer available. And remember, this video is about recognizing behavioral patterns, not diagnosing another person. People can display narcissistic behaviors without having narcissistic personality disorder. The goal is not to become paranoid. The goal is to become more aware, more grounded, and more capable of protecting your boundaries. Welcome to our channel, where we explore psychology, human behavior, and the hidden patterns behind relationships. If you want to understand people without losing yourself in the process, subscribe to the channel, because this is where we uncover what often goes unnoticed. The first thing to pay attention to when you see a person with strong narcissistic patterns after no contact is not what they say, it is what they look at. Before the conversation even begins, they may study your face, your posture, your eyes, your tone, and the way your body responds to their presence. This can happen within seconds. They may be trying to understand whether you are nervous, angry, uncomfortable, excited, or completely calm. Your reaction can become more important than the actual words being exchanged, because your reaction gives them information about whether they still have emotional influence over you. If you immediately look away, become tense, start explaining yourself, or show obvious anger, they may notice that the encounter still affects you. On the other hand, if you remain calm and continue behaving normally, that can create a very different situation. The important point is not to assume that every person who looks at your reaction is secretly trying to control you. People naturally read facial expressions and body language during social encounters. But when this behavior appears alongside a repeated history of manipulation, boundary testing, emotional pressure, or attention seeking, it can become much more meaningful. They may be checking whether the old emotional pattern is still there. In the past, perhaps one look from them could change your mood. One cold response could make you question yourself. One compliment could make you feel hopeful again. One accusation could make you start defending yourself. No contact interrupts that cycle. It creates distance between their behavior and your automatic response. That is why the first few seconds of seeing each other again can feel so important. They may be watching for the smallest sign that you are still emotionally connected to the old dynamic. Your reaction does not need to be dramatic for them to notice it. Even nervous laughter, excessive friendliness, avoiding eye contact, rushing to explain your life, or becoming unusually quiet can communicate that the encounter has emotional weight for you. This is also why staying grounded matters. You do not need to perform confidence. You do not need to pretend you feel nothing. You simply need to avoid allowing the other person's presence to decide how you behave. A calm response does not mean you are emotionless. It means you are not handing control of your behavior to the moment. And when they do not get the reaction they expected, another behavior can suddenly appear. They may act completely unbothered. They may walk past you as if nothing happened. They may suddenly look more confident, more relaxed, or even unusually happy. Sometimes the performance can seem almost too perfect. This is where the idea of impression management becomes useful. People often manage the way they present themselves because they care about how others perceive them. Someone may deliberately appear successful, confident, unaffected, or socially powerful after a difficult interaction. But outward behavior alone cannot tell you what someone is feeling internally. A person can look completely relaxed and still feel uncomfortable. A person can look extremely happy and still be processing complicated emotions. So the goal is not to become obsessed with decoding every facial expression. The useful question is whether their behavior forms a repeated pattern. Do they consistently try to create an image of being completely unaffected? Do they suddenly become more performative when you are around? Do they seem particularly interested in making sure you notice how well they are doing? One encounter cannot answer these questions. Patterns can. And sometimes the performance of indifference does not last very long. After appearing completely unaffected, they may suddenly find a reason to communicate. This is where another commonly discussed behavior enters the picture: hoovering. The term is often used in discussions about narcissistic relationships to describe attempts to pull someone back into communication or an old relational dynamic. It does not always begin with a dramatic declaration. In fact, it can begin with something so ordinary that you barely recognize what is happening. A casual question, a small compliment, a comment about an old memory, a sudden concern about how you are doing, an unnecessary message, a question that could have been answered without contacting you. The important part is not the specific words, it is the pattern behind the contact. Sometimes the first message is simply a test. Is the door still open? Will you answer immediately? Will you become emotional? Will you start explaining yourself? Will one small interaction turn into a longer conversation? That is why the smallest contact can sometimes become more significant than the dramatic one. A person does not always need to directly ask for another chance. They may first test whether they still have access to your attention. If you respond exactly as you did before, the old pattern can begin rebuilding itself, one small interaction at a time. This is why people who have chosen no contact often find the first reopening of communication confusing. The contact may look harmless. It may even feel flattering. You may wonder why they suddenly seem warmer. But warmth alone does not prove genuine change. A compliment does not prove accountability. Nostalgia does not prove growth. Concern does not automatically prove remorse. The real question is whether the person's behavior has changed consistently over time, especially when you maintain a boundary they do not like. That distinction matters because genuine reconciliation and manipulation can sometimes begin with similar words. The difference becomes clearer through consistency, responsibility, and respect for boundaries. Someone who has genuinely changed can accept that you have the right to make your own decision. Someone who is focused mainly on regaining access may become increasingly uncomfortable when you do not respond in the expected way. And if friendliness does not work, the next move can become much more revealing. The tone may change. Instead of charm, there may be guilt. Instead of a compliment, there may be a reminder of everything they supposedly did for you. Instead of asking how you are doing, they may suggest that you are the reason things ended badly. This shift can be subtle at first. They may mention the past and remind you of their sacrifices. They may talk about how much they supported you. They may suggest that you abandoned them when they needed you. They may frame your decision to maintain distance as cruel, selfish, or unfair. The emotional pressure comes from making you feel responsible for their feelings. Once guilt enters the conversation, the focus can move away from their behavior and toward your supposed failure to make them feel better. This is an important distinction. Feeling guilty does not automatically mean you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt appears simply because you have stopped doing something that another person became accustomed to receiving from you. Maybe you stopped answering immediately. Maybe you stopped fixing their problems. Maybe you stopped accepting disrespect. Maybe you stopped giving endless explanations. When a pattern changes, the person who benefited from the old pattern may react strongly to the change. That reaction does not automatically make your boundary wrong. It may simply show that the boundary has become real. This is also why guilt can be so powerful in unhealthy relationship dynamics. It can make you question decisions that were actually protecting your well-being. You may start thinking, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should explain myself one more time. Maybe I owe them another conversation. And suddenly, the boundary that took months to build begins to weaken because you are trying to relieve someone else's discomfort. The safest way to understand these moments is to slow down and look at behavior rather than emotional pressure. Ask yourself whether the person is taking responsibility without excuses. Are they respecting your choices even when they disagree? Are they willing to accept that you may not want the same relationship anymore? Are they trying to understand the impact of their actions, or are they mainly trying to make you feel guilty for reacting to those actions? These questions reveal much more than a dramatic apology or an emotional speech, because genuine remorse does not require you to surrender your boundaries. Genuine change does not demand immediate access, and genuine respect does not disappear simply because you say no. The moment you stop responding automatically, the entire interaction changes. The other person now has to deal with a version of you who is observing instead of reacting, listening instead of defending, and choosing instead of being pulled into the old emotional cycle. And that is often when the smallest behavior becomes the most revealing one. The real test may not happen during the first conversation. It may happen after you make your boundary clear. Anyone can appear respectful for a few minutes. Anyone can smile, stay calm, and pretend that everything is fine. But the deeper question is what happens when they realize that your boundary is actually real. If you say you do not want to continue the conversation, do they accept it? If you stop responding, do they give you space? If you make it clear that you do not want the relationship to return to the way it was, do they respect that decision, or do they keep looking for another opening? This is where patterns become more useful than isolated moments. A person with strong narcissistic traits may test a boundary in very small ways. They may send another message after you already made your position clear. They may create a reason to contact you. They may ask a question that does not really need an answer. They may suddenly become extremely kind after being distant for a long time. They may offer a compliment. They may bring up an old memory. They may act as if the conflict never happened. None of these behaviors automatically prove manipulation. The important part is what happens when you continue to hold your boundary. Respect is often revealed when someone hears a no. If they accept the no without trying to punish you, pressure you, or make you feel guilty, that tells you something. But if every boundary creates another attempt to get around it, that repeated pattern tells you something too. This is why you should avoid judging the entire situation based on one dramatic interaction. Watch what happens over time. A single friendly conversation cannot prove genuine change. A single angry reaction cannot explain an entire personality. Patterns are more informative because patterns show what someone repeatedly chooses to do when they do not get the response they want. And sometimes, when a person realizes that your boundary is not moving, the interaction can shift from testing your boundary to testing your emotions. This is where provocation can appear. For people high in narcissistic traits, rejection can be especially emotionally threatening because research has linked narcissism with stronger anger and aggression following social rejection. That does not mean every person with narcissistic traits becomes aggressive, and it certainly does not mean every difficult reaction is caused by narcissism, but it helps explain why rejection can sometimes trigger a very strong emotional response. The provocation may not always look dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be sarcasm disguised as humor. It can be a dismissive comment about your appearance. It can be criticism about your life. It can be an accusation that you have changed. It can be a comment designed to make you jealous. It can even be a casual remark that seems harmless but is clearly aimed at getting an emotional response. The important question is not whether the comment was clever or insulting. The important question is what happens when you refuse to react. If the conversation only becomes intense when you stop giving emotional energy, that pattern deserves attention. Someone may say something provocative, and then watch carefully to see what you do next. Do you defend yourself? Do you become angry? Do you start explaining? Do you try to prove them wrong? Do you ask for their approval? Every emotional reaction gives the interaction more energy, and sometimes that is exactly what keeps an old dynamic alive. This is why staying calm can be so powerful. Calmness does not mean weakness. It means you are refusing to let someone else choose your emotional speed. You can hear an accusation without immediately defending yourself. You can hear criticism without turning the moment into a debate. You can recognize an attempt to provoke you without giving the reaction that was expected. And when the emotional reaction does not arrive, the interaction may become very different. The focus can then shift toward another question. Do you still care? Not necessarily in the healthy sense of caring about another human being. The question may be whether they can still affect you. There is a major difference between attention and genuine connection. Someone can want your attention without wanting to build a healthy relationship with you. Someone can be interested in your life without being prepared to respect your boundaries. Someone can ask about your relationship status, your appearance, your success, your plans, or your emotional state simply because they want information about where they still stand in your world. That does not automatically reveal their motive. But when these questions appear alongside a history of manipulation or emotional control, the pattern becomes worth observing. They may notice that you look happier. They may notice that you seem more confident. They may notice that you have stopped checking for their approval. They may become curious about whether someone else is in your life. They may suddenly want to know what you have been doing during the time you were apart. Sometimes the questions sound casual, but the emotional reaction afterward can reveal more. If you answer calmly, do they lose interest? If you mention that you are doing well, do they suddenly become colder? If you say that you have moved forward, do they become dismissive? If you refuse to discuss your private life, do they respect that? Again, the goal is not to become a detective who analyzes every word. The goal is to notice whether the person consistently respects your autonomy. You do not need to prove that you have moved on. You do not need to look happier just to make them jealous. You do not need to show them that you have become successful. You do not need to make them regret losing you. In fact, trying too hard to prove that you are unaffected can sometimes keep you emotionally connected to the very person you are trying to move beyond. If your entire focus becomes making sure they know you are doing well, they are still occupying space in your mind. Real emotional distance is quieter. It does not require an audience. You can simply continue living your life. You can answer when you want to answer. You can remain silent when silence is appropriate. You can protect information that you do not want to share. You can leave a conversation without making a dramatic statement. You can refuse to argue without needing the other person to understand why. This leads to one of the most important ideas in the entire situation. The most powerful response is often the least dramatic one. Revenge may feel satisfying for a moment, but it keeps your attention connected to the other person. Trying to make them jealous still gives them a role in your decisions. Trying to prove that they lost someone valuable still makes their opinion important. A healthier response is much simpler. Keep your boundary. Stay calm. Say what you mean. Do not over-explain. Do not enter arguments that have no useful outcome. You do not need to win the interaction because your life is not a competition. You do not need to force them to admit that they were wrong. You do not need to make them understand your value. And you do not need to perform emotional strength for anyone. Your boundary becomes stronger when your actions remain consistent with it. If you said you do not want contact, consistency matters. If you said you do not want to discuss the past, consistency matters. If you decided that certain behavior is no longer acceptable, consistency matters. The power comes from repetition. One strong statement followed by endless exceptions can create confusion. A simple boundary followed consistently is much clearer. This is also why the period after the encounter can be more revealing than the encounter itself. Watch what happens next. Do they suddenly contact you again? Do they become unusually friendly? Do they send messages that appear completely random? Do they bring up memories from the past? Do they criticize you through other people? Do mutual friends suddenly start asking questions? Do they disappear for a while and then return as if nothing happened? Do they respect your decision, or do they keep searching for another way into your life? These behaviors can tell you more than the first conversation because they show what happens after the initial emotional moment has passed. Someone may behave perfectly when they first see you, but their later actions may reveal whether they truly accepted the boundary. Someone may appear cold during the encounter, but later leave you completely alone, which can be far more respectful than a dramatic apology followed by repeated pressure. This is why you should not obsess over one facial expression, one sentence, or one awkward moment. Look at the larger pattern. Look at consistency. Look at whether their actions match their words. Look at what happens when you say no. Look at how they respond when they cannot control the outcome. And most importantly, pay attention to yourself. Notice whether you feel pulled back into explaining, defending, proving, chasing, or seeking approval. That internal reaction can be just as important as anything the other person does, because no contact is not only about removing another person from your life. It is about breaking the automatic cycle that once made their behavior control your emotional response. When that cycle begins to lose its power, even a familiar face can stop having the same influence it once had. When you see a narcissist after no contact, the biggest change may not be what they do when they see you. The biggest change may be the person standing in front of them. The old version of you may have rushed to explain, chased answers, reacted to every cold look, defended every accusation, or searched for approval. But after no contact, you may no longer play that role. You may listen without reacting. You may stay calm without pretending. You may walk away without needing the last word. And that is where the real power begins. You do not need to make them jealous. You do not need to prove that you are happier. You do not need to make them regret losing you. You do not even need them to understand why you left. Your peace does not require their agreement. Remember, you cannot control their reaction, their feelings, or what they choose to do next, but you can control your response. The strongest boundary is not a dramatic speech, it is consistency. When your actions match your decisions, the old cycle becomes harder to restart. So if you ever meet them again, do not focus only on what they are doing. Ask yourself what you are doing differently now. Are you still seeking their approval? Are you still trying to prove your worth? Are you still allowing one sentence to ruin your entire day? Or can you finally see the interaction without becoming trapped inside it? That is the real transformation after no contact. You stop trying to control the other person and start protecting yourself. If you have experienced something similar, share your experience in the comments and tell us what behavior you noticed after going no contact. Your story may help someone else recognize a pattern they could not see before. And if this video helped you understand the situation from a different perspective, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear this, and subscribe to the channel for more psychology, relationship, and human behavior content. Remember this, you do not need to control their reaction. You only need to control your response. Sometimes the strongest message you can send is not a word. It is the life you continue living without needing their permission.